Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series CAGED Theory. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can use the CAGED system for soloing. First off, if you like all the diagrams for this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, CAGED Theory. But I am working on it as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching this lesson. If it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 18 from our series CAGED Theory. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So this is the last lesson I'm doing on CAGED system theory, and we've covered a ton of stuff in this series. And the CAGED system is definitely not a definitive way to look at the guitar, but it can take you a really long way in understanding the guitar, understanding how you can break it up and be able to visualize it much easier. But eventually you need to break out of the CAGED system and start combining all these shapes together. But like I said, this will take you a really long way if you spend time to learn it and really get it down. So like I said, this is the last lesson, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how you can use the CAGED system along with the arpeggios and scales that fit around the CAGED chords to solo. So this will really help you, when you're soloing, sound a lot stronger. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to take a basic chord progression. So I've taken the chords G, D, E minor 7, C major 7. And those chords together would be in the key of G, and it would be a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of G. Now if you don't understand keys or why these chords would be in the key of G or what the 1, 5, 6, 4 is, you can go back and watch our series Music Theory for Guitar where I explain all that, and that'll really give you everything you need to know about what I'm going to talk about in this lesson, along with the rest of these CAGED lessons that we've gone over. So if you were to come across this chord progression and you wanted to solo over it, you could use the G major scale. All these notes that are in the G major scale, which I have shown on the screen right now, work over those chords, because all of those chords come straight out of the G major scale. But the problem with soloing like this is that if you just play randomly with the scale, it's not going to sound very strong. Over some chords it's going to sound strong with certain notes, and then when you change to a different chord, those notes might sound weak or even really bad. So you have to really be aware of your weak tones, your strong tones, and your avoid tones. And if you went through our series Music Theory for Guitar, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And also in that series I talked about how you can use the modes to really help you sound strong when you're soloing. Even if everything is in one key, how you can use the modes to make sure that you're hitting the good tones and avoiding the weaker tones as landing tones. But there's actually an easier way you can do it to sound really strong by using the CAGED system. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this lesson. So if we go back to this chord progression and we look at each chord individually, the first chord is a G major. Like I said, it's in the key of G, so you could use a G major scale over it, but that's going to sound pretty weak if you just use these notes without really knowing what's going on. You're going to hit some avoid tones or notes that just sound weaker instead of landing on the strong tones. And a way you can do that, a way you can make sure that you land on strong tones and not land on weak tones, is first to visualize the CAGED chords within that scale. So now we're looking at the G major scale still, but we're looking at all the G major CAGED chords within it. So we've done this multiple times. I don't think I need to point out where all these CAGED chords are. You can go back and watch the other lessons if you're still struggling with that. But hopefully you can see where all these CAGED chords, all these G major CAGED chords are lying within the G major scale. And before we talked about this, we were talking about you could play a chord, hit the chord, and then throw in some of these notes for little licks, riffs, or fills. But this lesson we're actually going to talk about how you can use this for soloing. So the next step you would take, instead of just looking at the CAGED chords, would then be to add in the arpeggio tones as well. So now you have the CAGED chords and filled in with the rest of the arpeggio tones, which are the same tones as what's in the chords, but we've just filled in all the different spots so that none of the roots, threes, or fives are left out. So for example, right here you have the G major chord, that's the E shape. I'm sure you can see that. And right here you have the D major shape, which is still a G major chord. And then you have the C major shape right here, still a G major chord. Well, these two notes right here weren't in the actual CAGED chords. Those are just arpeggio tones that we've added in around, which you should remember this from when we talked about the CAGED chords with the arpeggios. So now you have, for example, this C shape plus extra notes of the arpeggio that you can throw in. So now you can visualize the whole arpeggio in this scale. So now when you use this for soloing, you can still play the G major scale over the G major chord, but now you can visualize the notes that are your strongest landing tones. And your strongest landing tones are always the chord tones, which are the arpeggios. So for example, if I was playing over that G major chord, you could visualize this C major shape right here, but then you could also visualize the extra notes around it. So now you have the C major shape arpeggio. So when you're soloing over that G major chord, you can hit any of these notes, including the gray notes, but then use the roots, threes, and fives for your landing tones, and it's going to sound really strong. That way you're never going to hit and land on a weak tone or an avoid tone. So instead of thinking about modes and having to change your modes over every chord, you can just use the CAGED chords and the arpeggios around it to know that those are your strongest landing tones. So when you're soloing, you can play any of these notes, but when you land and rest on a tone, you can rest on one of these arpeggio tones and it's going to sound really strong. And then you can do that for all the chords. So the first chord is G major, second chord is D major. So now we just look at the G major scale again. Then we visualize the D CAGED chords, the D major CAGED chords, which are what are on your screen right now. And then you throw in the extra arpeggio tones. So now you have the cage shaped arpeggios along. So you just have the CAGED chords and then the arpeggios around it, or combined they create full arpeggios. So now when you're soloing over that D chord, you can do the same thing. You can visualize these arpeggios along with the CAGED chords, play any of these notes, but then when you land on a note and actually rest on it, land on one of the tones of the arpeggio, because those are going to be your strongest tones. Then the same thing for the next two chords. The next one is E minor 7. Visualize the G major scale because it's still in the key of G. Then visualize your E minor 7 CAGED chords within it. Then visualize how that can turn into arpeggios with the extra notes added in, but you still visualize the CAGED chord so that you're able to find the arpeggios easily. And now when you're soloing over that E minor 7, you have all these notes that you can use, including the gray notes, but all these arpeggio tones are your strongest landing tones. And since you're over a 7th chord now, you have that 7th in there as well instead of just the roots, threes, fives. Same thing for the last chord, which was C major 7. Visualize your C major 7 CAGED chords. Visualize the arpeggios that fit in around it, and now you can solo over that C major 7, sound really strong because you can use any of these notes, but then when you land on the arpeggio tones, and that's always going to sound strong. And now you don't have to worry about modes or anything. You just visualize the CAGED chords and the arpeggios. Those are always your strong landing tones. Use the other notes for color tones to throw them in, and then just land on your arpeggio tones. You're always going to sound strong. So that's how you can use the CAGED system for soloing. Like I said, this is the last lesson I'm doing for the CAGED series, and we've covered a lot of stuff. If you need to go back and have a refresher on anything, just go back and watch it again because there's a lot of information we covered. And be sure to check out our other series that we have and other lessons on our channel. We have lots of stuff and we add new ones every single day, so be sure to check that out to learn more about different topics. And be sure, once this is available, to download the e-guide because it has all these charts. It'll be really useful to you. Be able to use it for years to come as a reference. And be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day.